good. Okay. So we're here with Joyce Brown. It's July 30th, 2025, and we're going to talk to her about her history as an activist and her history as an American citizen and her views of things she has experienced in her life. So why don't you just give us a quick introduction of where you were born and a little bit about your history and what kind of formulated your earliest thoughts about.
Okay, well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but that didn't last long. My dad was in the Navy in Pensacola, Florida, so when I was about 2 or 3 months old, I wound up in Pensacola. Then took a trip across the country, apparently, I don't remember it, but my father was a union organizer, and he was heading out west to become a ship workers union organizer. And when he got there, it turned out that he was blacklisted. They wouldn't let him. So we wound up in Philadelphia with his family, and I grew up in Philadelphia.
Brothers, sisters?
I had a sister who died in 1978, and she was my best friend, and it was the hardest thing in the world to lose her. We would have been team people in this whole movement together if she had stayed alive.
And your mother, was she?
My mother was an activist as well. My parents became radicalized in the 30s and 40s, and they worked in the civil rights movement long before it became a popular movement to be in. They worked in that. They worked in the anti-fascist movements, and my father became a union organizer at Sunship. And at that time, Sunship was a segregated shipyard, and he worked with 3 other people in Sunship to integrate it, and at the end of his term there it was.
So you refer to the term as a red diaper baby. Could you tell us what that means?
Well, my parents were Reds, so all of the children of all of these Red parents became the red diaper babies. And during the McCarthy era, we were a lot of my parents' friends were in prison. They faced the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. Some of them were part of the Hollywood 10, and they were actors and actresses who could not get jobs. People like Pete Seeger and Paul Robeson were completely blacklisted at that time, and our parents were among those who fought against this, again through some of them who went to prison, but they raised all of us to believe in the ideals that they believed in, from each according to one's ability to each according to one's need, and for peace, freedom, and social justice in this world.
So when you talk about blacklisting, for people who are not familiar with what that was during those times, can you kind of give us a little context as to why people were blacklisted?
Well, they held views that were anti-fascist, that were pro-labor, that were for the equality of all people. Some of them were communists, some of them were socialists, some of them weren't, but held those views anyway. And what happened was that when McCarthy came into power, they began the same fear that is going around this country with Trump was going around then, and these people were being fired. Many were teachers, and many of them were big leaders in the teachers' unions all over the country, and yet they were fired wholesale from their jobs because of the views that they held.
So do you see any parallels today with those activities that occurred at that time? I
see absolute parallels. I've been saying to people for years, as we watch some of these Republican administrations come in and fight against civil liberties and fight against rights and fight against workers' rights and union rights, that you don't know how bad it can get. And then they got Trump, and that's how bad it got. It got bad, and in many ways it's almost worse right now because no one is fighting back, or the people that are fighting back aren't being heard. During the McCarthy era, there were whole movements of progress that were completely wiped out, and people were absolutely tormented. For instance, I was a child, I was maybe 6 or 7, and I was walking through a neighborhood in Philadelphia called Strawberry Mansion with another little friend of mine, and the FBI was following us. We always could recognize them because they had short hair and they wore glasses. And they were following us, telling us that if we didn't speak to them, our parents were going to die like the Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were murdered by the state. Their sons were raised by the Mirapoles, and we, all of our parents fought fearlessly to get the stay of execution and just couldn't do it. It was a horrible, horrible time. And we all felt that this could happen to us and to our parents as well.
Okay, so this push again, this censorship, okay, and belief in a skewed version of freedom, okay, and what it meant towards the American way, is certainly being repeated today in the Trump regime in a lot of ways. So this is not something that was new. It's something that you're seeing repeated in your lifetime. So what are your thoughts about that when you see these social movements and these advances that you hope for society, okay, that you thought had progressed due to, activism and due to essentially being out on the streets, and now seeing those things just taking such a terrible swing backwards,
First of all, it terrifies me, not for me, but it terrifies me for my children, my great-grandchildren, my grandchildren, that they're going to have to live and fight back themselves. I'm not sure that I see the leaders around that came to me when I was a child and taught me how to do this. I'm not sure I see these role models emerging to give our young people the kind of hope that we had. We were targeted, the group of children that I grew up, we were targeted, we were isolated, so we found each other. And we formed social groups with each other so that we would have friends. Because of McCarthyism, neighbors were told not to talk to us. We were literally isolated. So again, we did everything together, and because of that, we had leaders like King and Abernathy who came and talked to us. We had Elizabeth Gurley Flynn who came and talked to us. These were great sheroes and heroes of our time, and they taught us how to organize and how to do things to make the world a better place. And when you learn at 13 and 14 and 15, it never leaves you. And every single one of my friends who was part of that group then and is still on this side of the sod, sorry to say so many have died, but are still doing it. No one has ever quit. We truly believe that if we band together, we can make the world a better place.
So there's a dirty word now out there that you hear from the right called socialism. Okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the fear, I presume, is that things will be taken from them as part of the whole, or things that they think they're entitled to as part of society, and turned over to people who are less deserving. Okay, so when you're out there fighting for equality and you're fighting for a better life for all, what response do you have to those people who say, well, that's socialism, and that's not something that should be a part of American society because we're really a democracy or republic?
Well, first of all, I think there's a fear of socialism because of the way movements disintegrate around the world. Some movements come in and call themselves socialist movements. They bring a lot of good change, and then suddenly, just like Trump came in and is beginning to destroy this country, the same thing happens in other parts of the world. And what they do is disintegrate not into socialism, but into fascism and into Nazism. And that's a system that, it's an economic system basically, but it's a system that pits one person against another for the benefit of the rich and the wealthy. If you can get people fighting with each other and fighting against their own self-interests, then the ruling class rises and everybody else is squelched. It's like a melting pot where everything at the bottom burns and the scum rises to the top. And that's what's happening now. The scum is rising to the top. And it's a very, very, very hard thing to fight. What we do is we look at history and see what socialism really is. And to me, I think I mentioned earlier too in our discussion, was that the very first socialist I can think of is Benjamin Franklin. Why was he a socialist? He said that tax money should go to the people. So he helped form free schools for all of the children. He helped form libraries and fire departments, so nobody had to pay to have their fire put out. It came out of their taxes. That's the basis of socialism in this country, was that when we formed this country, we formed it for the benefit of all of the people. And we shook off the tyranny of bad King George. We came to these people came to this country for freedom. My grandparents were involved in pogroms in Russia. My grandmother had spearheads in her mark. Her entire family was slaughtered by Cossacks. They came to this country because they thought they could be free here. And they fought for unions in this country. They fought for everybody's rights in this country because they knew what it was like to be so badly oppressed in another part of the world.
Okay, so as we swing, we're seeing an obvious swing with the Republicans in power now, okay, into a belief that only certain people should be allowed to have power. That there's a disintegration of women's rights, there's a disintegration of rights of people of color, disintegration of people who have sexual identities that are outside of what would be considered straight type of relationship, people that may be gay or transgender, what have you. So as those things are attacked, what visions do you have of what it was like in those days, and how do you see that kind of playing out now, and how does that affect you and your thought process as you revisit some of these things that were a very big part of your early childhood?
Well, we were coming out of World War II when I was a child, and that was a very, very bad time economically for everybody. We had a lot of immigrants in this country who had fled, the ones that were allowed into this country, because this country did ban a lot of people from coming into this country, even though they were fleeing Nazism. Things are not that different right now, except that we're picking on different groups of people right now. So what I'm hoping for is that we can start at the grassroots level with young people and teach them how to form community, to build community within their own neighborhoods. To me, the only way you can make change, and this I got from our friend Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger was an amazing, amazing role model to me and a dear friend. And Pete would say, think globally, act locally. So you can think about the whole world and what's going on in the whole world, but the only place you can really make a difference is with your neighbors and in your own hometown. So that if you want to change the world, you have to start right where you live. Pete did it with the Hudson River, which was a garbage heap when he started. That was one of his changes. And in his time taking his boats up and down the river, they cleaned up the Hudson River. He brought We Shall Overcome to the civil rights movement, and people still sing it today. We have to think locally, and we have to get to know our neighbors as friends and talk to our neighbors and say, if there's a pothole in the street, this is how we fix it. And if somebody is being kicked out of your neighborhood because they look different than you, this is how we fix it.
I think people believe now, and you hear this quite frequently as far as immigrants, that you'll hear rhetoric that goes, well, it's not that I'm against immigrants, it's against the fact that they've come in illegally, okay? And so they're getting what they deserve, okay? And they need to come in if they want to be Americans, and they have to do it properly, like all our ancestors who came here. I'm not convinced that every immigrant who came in legally, exactly. And I think those times were very different as to how you could access coming into this country and the method and process of doing so. But, how do you respond to that? Because that builds, I think, a platform of hatred, okay, as an excuse to look at immigrants as these people who are undeserving of having the opportunity to be here. And you'll hear about people who are here 20 years and they haven't gotten citizenship. And I don't think people really understand the obstacles and the cost that goes into becoming a citizen here. When the Trump administration came in, they promised the immigrants they would go after would be those who were vicious criminals or those who were a danger to society, and clearly we are not seeing that. So when you think about immigrants in general, and you think about how they were treated in those days and how we're seeing them today, and certain segments are seeing them as these people who are very evil and need to be placed in what essentially are these detention centers where they're robbed of due process, which is a right that is enshrined in our Constitution. What are your thoughts about that as far as these fights and activities that you engaged in to protect, freedom for everybody?
First of all, I don't think anybody in this whole world is illegal, and there isn't a person in this world that's in it illegal. There are people that do bad things, and those people who do bad things that are dangerous to society should pay the price for that. But most people don't do bad things. Most people came here because they had no other choice. They were economically deprived where they lived. They were starving. They were mistreated. They were beaten. They were jailed. Their children were hurt. These are reasons for fleeing for your own life, and we need to treat people, every human being, as if they're legal. Except for Native Americans, everybody in this country was an immigrant. My guess is that a lot of the people that came into this country were shipped here as prisoners to be gotten out of other places in the world. That certainly happened in Australia, and it's happened in a lot of other places. Nobody is illegal. Everybody deserves a right to human dignity and human rights. Now, if you want to set up a structure to make that happen and make it easier, do that. Make people's lives better. But nobody deserves to be beaten, starved, and because they look differently or they speak a different language or their skin is a different color. I'm an artist. I believe that the world full of color is a beautiful thing. I don't want to see a world of only black and white. I want people to see every possibility that there is and give everybody the opportunity to live in freedom, to live in dignity, to eat, to go to school, to be educated, and to have a job. That's what we deserve in this country. Those are the rights that we deserve.
I think what we see now is a push, what we know is a push of wealth to very few at the top. And we see a very large economic divide between even the middle class and this very extreme wealth. And I think that has not just a divisive occurrence, but it also causes instability, societal instability. And when you talk about people having these opportunities, okay, we're not really seeing that now, are we? Those opportunities are being stripped. And not just from people of color or people who are immigrants or people who may be non-white, okay, or of certain nationalities and color and sexual orientation. But there's a push to use that as a way to change society into a society of hatred, a society of intolerance, and a society where those freedoms are not afforded to everybody. So when you think about those things going on now and these sociocultural changes in the political environment that we're currently dealing with, and you talk about the idea of organizing, the idea of this grassroots, where is that base? How do we find that base and use that to empower those who want to see this country really represent those qualities that we know are true? Equality for all, opportunity for all, freedom for all. How do you find that base when we have one party who is very extremist to the right wing, almost pushing towards fascism, and we have another party who can't seem to create a equally as powerful platform and message?
Well, first of all, I think that more people believe the way we do than don't. But they don't know what to do or how to bring it about. So I think that, first of all, there are organizations in our community that are already out in the streets and doing things like the Indivisibles. They're an incredible group of people who form a network. They're nonpartisan. But they speak for what's right in this world and for the rights of human beings in this world, and they march for that. But based upon marching alone, we'll never get anywhere. So what we do, again, is we find a base of people that we can work with, especially young people, because people like me are getting kind of old. You know, when you get to your 80s, it's kind of hard to go door to door in this heat. But to find a group of young people and talk to them about how we bring about change and what do we bring about change for? What is in your own self-interest? Is your own self-interest the ability to get a job? Is your own self-interest the ability to save the planet from climate change? What about unions? And, you know, I think we need to go into the unions and speak with the unions even more, because there are a lot of young people in the unions who could be out in the streets advocating for us as well. We have bases all over the place. We have civil rights groups all over the places, and we don't all need to do things as one, but we need to do things together. You know, we need to address our communities together. And once we can get into our communities and meet our neighbors and talk about these issues and maybe change the Constitution of Florida through our numbers to allow for these things to take place, if we do it in Florida, they'll pick it up in another state.
So when we talk about the post-war generation, that, you know, those opportunities that were afforded to the growing middle class at that time, which was GI Bill and these other social platforms or social reforms that were available to make people's lives better. Okay, and there was a context of history. People knew what happened in World War II. They found out about the fascism. They found out about the destruction of millions of people and this wanton hatred and cruelty as a cleansing method to create a pure society, a pure group of people, which were going to be Aryans and Germans and of that sort. And now we see those things happening similarly now, okay, where we're trying to cleanse society here in a certain way. And we have young people that you talk about now who don't have memories of that, who don't have a context for that. I remember as a child myself seeing the numbers tattooed on concentration camp victims' arms. And to them, it's just this fantasy of something that they don't really connect with. I spoke to people and heard people speak who had liberated these camps and found the conditions and the people who had been just tortured and treated terribly cruelly there. But young people don't have that context now, okay? They don't have that reality. They don't have that one-on-one ability to understand those things. And you know, you see, I've seen extremism where I've seen young people who proudly will say they're a fascist when they don't have any idea of what that really means, okay, and what it really entails. And people who think that it's okay that we allow or promote a society where somebody decides who is the best person based on the dictates of an ideology that doesn't protect the whole that you talk about. So how do you create that movement that existed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s based on the context of what we're dealing with today?
Well, people were coming out of World War II then because they went to fight fascism. I didn't have any of those memories. They were given to me by my elders.
Mm-hmm.
They were given to me by really special people who had fought before me for these same values, who went to war to fight fascism, who built the unions, who did all of these things. I can name a lot of them, but you know, we'll do that some other time maybe. But I have the memories for the younger generation, and so do a lot of other people my age. And I can share these memories with them. Mark has the memories of the next generation after me. You have those memories as well. These are the memories that we can share with young people if we can gather them together and can show them what we've done. I have friends who are still in SNCC, and SNCC was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that brought the civil rights movement to the South. It was part of what CORE was another. There were all sorts of civil rights groups all working in the South to end segregation. These folks are there, they're still alive, they can be brought in to talk to young people as well. We have the memories to share, and we have the abilities to know how to make things different and how to change things. And we would love to share these things with young people and give them the ability to grow old like me and share them with the next generation. We have gaps in generations in terms of activism, so that it may be a lot harder now than it was when I was a child. But we still have that ability to do it. And I would love to gather together, you know, all of us old folks with these memories, to be able to sit with young people and say, look, all of this is possible. We did it once and now it's your turn. We want to turn the reins over to you. This is what we fought for. The things that you need to fight for now, or that, you know, what you decide you need to fight for, because I'm not going to tell you what you have to fight for. But we will tell you how we did it. And by you taking those lessons from us, you can interpret them any way that you want, but you can build a movement yourselves to make this happen. And once you build this movement, make sure it's a movement of integrity, where no one buys you out, and a movement that you pass on to the next generation, so that you don't have to work as hard as we did.
So I think that young people growing up now are very different than those in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. They have a very different culture. You know, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones. You know, they'll often look at me and say, well, how did you communicate with people when you had rallies and sit-ins and acts of civil disobedience if you couldn't call them on a cell phone? And somehow we were able to communicate those things. And I think the reason is because we coalesce together. And I don't know that that occurs as much. I think that, again, going back to the socioeconomic divide is a serious problem. You know, the instability of having extremes of poverty and wealth. We have an administration now that's trying to criminalize poverty and homelessness. Okay, instead of helping those people rise up. There is certainly a cultural aspect, the bro culture, this machismo culture, alpha culture with men who think it's okay that women are not considered to be equal to men. There's been a stripping again. There's been a stripping of the rights of women to control their own bodies. I'm sure you've heard of the case of the woman in Georgia who was kept alive on machines as an incubator for a fetus, despite her family's not wanting to do this, and was billed for that as well. So that autonomy that women have has been eroded, despite what was many years of fighting to retain that. And I can't speak certainly for that entire cohort of young people, but I don't think that they're finding a way to coalesce around these issues, even though they may be sympathetic and believe in them. I don't think they have a lot of faith in the system. I don't think they have a lot of faith in some of these organizing efforts in terms of their ability to create change. I don't think they have a belief in the political system or in the cultural system of activism as a way of creating change. And so, in our time, coalescing with each other, conversing with each other, relating to each other, indulging in conversations that were meaningful would create a sense of activism that can be moved forward. How do you address that with a generation that doesn't relate to that really at all?
Well, I'm not sure that's all true. But let me give you some examples. I ran a little gallery in Lake Worth. I'm an artist. I ran a little gallery in Lake Worth, and we had a group called the Rising Tide group of kids. I was funded for this for a while. We had a group of kids. We were funded for 10 kids, but we couldn't turn kids away, so we had 25 kids. I believe that culture builds communities. I gave these young people free art lessons. They were able to sell their work. They were able to make money. We also gave them little stipends and open bank accounts for them. In exchange, they did community service. And these young people went out and they registered 5,000 new voters. They translated to Creole and to Mayan languages. They were LGBTQ kids into Spanish. They worked with other people who needed translators, and they worked their hearts out. And they still continue. I hear from them all of the time. They still continued. When COVID hit, and we had to shut down the gallery, except for Black Lives Matter arose. So all of these kids came back to me, and they began to work in the Black Lives Matter movement. And they made things. They made 400 plaques that said, Black Lives Matter, we speak our pain. And each one of the kids was able to put their story of discrimination onto these plaques. And they took them out. They registered kids to vote. They had huge rallies. So I don't believe that if an issue comes up, these kids aren't there. They just need a way to organize, a place to organize, and the ability to organize. And to me, organizing through the arts is the best way forward for young people. Let me also talk about homeless. We had 5 homeless people that we brought into our gallery, and they made things and they sold them, and they were not homeless at the end of the year, because the arts give them an ability to create, to do something, and to think differently. You change minds, you change brain waves by giving people different skills. We want to give kids the ability to sing. In the movements that we had before, we all sang. There wasn't a movement where we didn't sing something. We didn't say, what does democracy look like? This is what. We sang songs about the issues, and we were united through the songs. We went home and sang the songs. We went to coffee houses and sang the songs, and we brought them into the movement, and it united us. With the arts do that. We have the ability, if we could find a building, and this is a crass commercial, right here. We need somebody to give us a large building where we can do all of this, where we can bring people together and train them and give them skills that they will keep for the rest of their lives, especially in the arts, in the music, and the performance arts, and juggling, and unicycle riding, whatever those skills may be. And in exchange, they will give us their time to work in their communities to build a better community for themselves. And in doing so, we can change the world.
Going back to the arts, I think in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were certainly well-known writers, actors, artists that were very involved in the movement. And there are people that speak up now in the arts, but they don't really take a leadership position. They don't really take part in the activism. And I think when you talk about Pete Seeger, Joan Baez, and other people who were a big part of that movement, Woody Guthrie, whomever, you can fill in that I'm sure you interacted with, but it's hard to find that now. And as a college professor, I hear often from young people that they feel that their voice doesn't count, that there's nothing there for them to really grab onto. They feel fearful, they're oppressed economically sometimes, or they're extremely wealthy and don't see how it relates to them whatsoever. And I think it's a little harder to reach them. I think it's a wonderful thought. I definitely think it works, but I think it's a little bit harder to achieve in this time when you really do have attention being drawn to the internet and influencers and an overabundance of information and chatter, for lack of a better word, out there. When we all grew up, there were 3 TV stations. We were talking about that, and now there's 300. I don't even know, but how do you capture them? They don't have. They're so removed from a history, and also I think because their parents are struggling. Even somebody who has a good paying job, who may be doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, or whatever, you often have 2 parents working just to maintain what would be an upper middle class or middle class environment of stability, that they don't have that guidance from the parents like we had.
Okay, well, I have to say this. I've never worked with a kid whose parents weren't struggling and who wasn't struggling themselves. Most of the kids throughout my entire life that I've either talked or worked with, including my own, have had struggling parents. But when you give them an option and an alternative to make their lives better, and I think the arts do that, and I'm a clay artist, but there are all different kinds of arts. I'm not talking about just clay. Right. I'm talking about painting, I'm talking about music, I'm talking about the things that create better lives for people. Then I think that you give them options, and once we get hold of these kids, and they'll come for free lessons, because that's what, I don't want it to be paid anything to do this. I want to do this with kids because I want them to have a better life for themselves. I think there are icons around this country like Taylor Swift, for instance, and Bruce Springsteen, whom I've reached out to, that I would like to grab hold of, and I don't know how to quite do that yet, because I used to know them all, and now I'm so old, most of the people I knew are dead, literally dead. But I'd like to convince them to become part of this movement and to speak to these kids and say, listen, you have a chance for a better life. And we are going to give you tools that you don't get in the public schools anymore because they're being stripped of all of this. But we are going to give you these tools, and you are going to share them with your friends, and you're going to share them. We're going to teach you how to plant a seed and grow a pumpkin for Halloween or for Thanksgiving. We're going to teach you how to raise a baby bird, maybe. We're going to teach you how to make music and sing so that you can sing to your children eventually. We're going to teach you how to make things, to build cardboard furniture that you can sit in. We're going to teach you how to make t-shirts that you can sell to people, so that you can make a living for yourself while you're doing this work. We're going to give you skills. We're going to teach you how to wire a house if we have to, so that you have a skill. And in exchange for this, you're going to go to your neighbors and you're going to help make their lives better too. And I've seen this work recently. I mean, as recent as, as in the last few years, I've seen this work. I know it works. I just need a place to make it work in.
So there are people within the movement or sympathetic to the movement who believe in education, who are capitalists, okay? So I guess the question would be, is it possible to be a capitalist and a liberal? Is it possible to be an elitist and a liberal? Because
those are 2 separate things.
So
the elitism is a problem, but the capitalism not necessarily, because there are capitalists who contribute to movements.
Okay. So I guess the question is that elitist schools have been demonized with this administration. Education, higher education in general, has been demonized by this administration. And devalued. And there are people in the academic world who have value to cultural movements, as we all know. And there's people in elitist schools who have value to cultural movements as well. It doesn't make them better or worse than anybody else, okay, but that exists. And then there may be people who are liberal but who seek a capitalist view of life, who want to go on to be doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. And do you think those class distinctions matter as long as they support the belief an opportunity for all Americans, regardless of what path they may take. And I say this as an artist myself, so I'm not unsympathetic to what you're
No.
describing, but you know, I mean,
Okay,
I don't want to
what-
labelize,
Okay,
you know,
what I say when I mean culture builds communities is
Yeah.
that everybody within a community, if they have something extra in their lives to use to make their lives better, can go on to be anything they want as long as it's a kind of job. I love doctors. I found a doctor whom I adore, progressive doctor. My doctor when I was growing up was progressive. I have no. You have a school like Harvard, you have the ultra right there, and you have the ultra left there, and you have everyone in the middle there. Every place we have in this country has this diversity of ideas. What I want to do is grow the diversity, grow the ideas in the middle and to the left, to give opportunity to everyone in this country. The right has the right to make all the money they want as long as they don't do it to exploit other people, as long as they don't create a slave class in this country. Make your money fairly and live on yachts and do whatever you want as long as everybody has food on their table, everybody has medical care, everybody has a house to live in, nobody has to live in the streets anymore, and we can do that in this country. It doesn't mean everybody has to be the same. It just means that the majority of us, and I do believe there is a majority of us that want decency for everybody in this world, has the right to make it happen. And to me, and because of what I do, I can do it through culture. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to become an artist, but everyone has to have this insight. We're diverse people. We have diverse and complex needs. And one of the needs of every person in this world, I believe, is a link to the arts. Whether the arts are music, whether, something in their lives to give them pleasure, whether it's making a TV show, whether, whatever it is. The creativity expands your world, it expands your life, and it enables you to give to other people. And when you can give this to a community and you put in a community garden, for instance, where everybody can harvest the tomatoes and everybody has a tomato to eat during season, that to me is how you build community. And that's how I use my life and my art. I had my own business. I ran a business, but I still never, the arts kept me alive in the worst of times. And I think we can do that for other people. I know Mark is an artist, an incredible artist, who does things for everybody around. I think half of the demonstrations around would not exist without the art that Mark creates for them.
So let's talk about education, since we're on that subject matter. Not just higher education, but public education has also taken a lot of hits.
Absolutely.
Okay. There's been infiltration of state and federal governments into local school boards and decisions regarding that. There's been, again, a demonizing of public education. There's been a withdrawal of funds claiming that they're promoting woke ideology. I don't know what they're thinking. There was actually a Democratic candidate here.
As opposed to sleep ideology.
Yeah. There was actually a Democratic candidate here in a panel, a Democratic candidate for school board here in this venue, who actually stated that she was very concerned about what was going on in kindergarten because they were being taught oral sex. And I'm like, oh my God, we started booing. Okay, I mean, it was just absurd. Okay, I can't, with my access to education, it's unheard of. We are not teaching oral sex in kindergarten. Okay, we may be teaching children where it's okay for strangers to touch them and what to do if a stranger touches them in a certain place. But we're certainly not teaching oral sex to 5-year-olds, okay? But there's this propagandistic spewing of these bizarre beliefs, okay, that an entire group of people is willing to latch onto as an excuse to withdraw money from public education, which is a right that every young person has. And in doing so, we lose that ability to have young people experience different cultures, different ways of life, all of the above, because they're going into places that are supposedly nonprofit, that are outside the regulatory agencies in terms of what would be considered standardization of education, okay? And I'm sure we've heard of all the issues of the pride flag on the wall and parents coming in and carrying on as if homosexuality is a contagious disease, okay? Which it is clearly not a contagious disease. Hatred seems to be contagious
That's a
disease,
contagious-
but
that's
certainly not
contagious.
homosexuality. So, you know, there's a whole cohort of parents and young people who think that public education is poison now, okay? And they're either homeschooling their children or they're putting them into these charter schools, which are being paid for in great part by taxpayer money, which should be going to public education. They're demonizing teachers, okay, for teaching history, certain history, Black history, slavery, and things that are part of American history that are not pretty parts of our history, but are certainly parts of our history. They're, you know, we've all heard of the censorship of books. I can't imagine how the Diary of Anne Frank is a dangerous book for any school child to read, or Night by Elie Wiesel, or any of these books that teach or speak about the worst part of the human condition and human behavior. And so when we talk about these conditions of gardens and all this wonderful opportunity that art does give to people, there's a reality of a cohort that pushes back against that and believes some of this bizarre rhetoric and is okay with withdrawing that, making it even harder to reach those cohorts or reach those people and reach those individuals and reach those children, because they're not in that environment anymore, and there's such a pushback against it. And you know, we now have a department, well, we have a cabinet full of fools. It's almost like a circus there. We have somebody heading the Department of Health and Human Services who's got worms in his brain and thinks vaccines are bad, and we have our Department of Education being run by a woman who thinks A1 is being taught in school, which we know is some kind of steak sauce, but you know, it's almost surreal. So, you know, when we talk about platforms of activism, we talk about ways of changing society. Society has already been changed right now in a very bad place, into a very bad place. And, you know, there's Indivisible and other groups that have grown from grassroots organizations to push back against some of these things that are not really part of the American civic ideal or what this country really stands for. But there is so much overwhelming rhetoric from bizarre sources that it almost feels overwhelming to respond to. And there isn't, again, something, a political party or a political ideal to coalesce with to create a platform to fight against that. There are people who believe that freedom is conditional. There are people out, you know, alligator Alcatraz. I understand right here on Lantana Road of 441 this weekend, there was somebody selling alligator Alcatraz merchandise. Okay. You know, as a person who is Jewish, as a person whose family was victimized by the Holocaust, I'm glad I wasn't there, because I'm not sure I could control my car from not, you know, veering, whatever. But how do you combat that when it's like combating fascism? You know, how did Hitler get to power? When you how do you educate people? I guess the question is, how do you educate people who are not really educatable at this point, because they're so resistant to truth, they're so resistant to hearing anything outside of that extraordinary rhetoric, that shocking rhetoric that veers clearly towards fascism, the cruelty of fascism, the extremism of fascism.
Yeah. When I went to elementary school, they were segregated. It was before the 54 Supreme Court decision and before the 57 March on Washington. It took us years to get things into the schools, working through teachers' unions and working through educators that reflected the society that we were in. At this point, the schools are beginning to look like they did back in the 50s again. we Holocaust education is not being taught. The history of slavery and the fight against slavery in this country is not being taught. The emancipation of women is not being taught in the schools anymore, which means we have to start all over again. It's the same fight that we've always had, and we have to organize in the same way we've always organized against these fights. In the meantime, we have to give kids outside of school the alternatives, opportunities to learn about these things and to learn about these things together as groups. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do through our
But you
Rising
have to have
Tide
parents who are
Initiative.
willing to have children engage in that. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not disagreeing with you in any capacity to give them that opportunity. And I ran an arts enrichment program at the State College to
Right.
allow for that. And we grew the program from 50 to 500 to 600. We made a lot of money for the college.
Right,
And it was withdrawn. The
Because,
program was withdrawn.
because parents
Okay.
want these things for their children.
Mhm.
Parents want things for the children, and if they're low income and they don't have to pay for them, they will send you their children by the flock. You know, they will send you the children. I'm not worried about getting the children, because the children will bring other children. When I had my kids, they brought their friends along because they all wanted to be part of this. They loved it. When they, we gave them these little things to walk through town with, they made little hearts and they walked through town to do acts of random kindness. There's so many things that you can do with kids. They will do it. If you build it, they will come. I'm not worried about getting children at all. I'm worried about having the place to be able to bring the children to. And that's an economic issue that we have to deal with. If the schools will not do this, then we can do this. The best way for children to learn about anti-racism is to work together as groups. If you have kids that speak different languages, that are different colors and different sexual identification genders, and they are all working together, after a while none of this will matter to any of them, because this is what normal is. That's what life is, and this is the opportunities that we want to give all kids. We've been offered a van to go out to all parts of this county, if we have a home base, where we can bring this to areas that don't even have arts at all in their schools. We had in the gallery, somebody donated a bunch of drums to us. There was no music program in the Glades, so I loaded up a truck full of drums for the Glades, so that those kids, with one of the teachers out there, so that those kids would have it. We just need a base to work out of, and we can make all of this happen. We have people all over this county, and it is the largest county east of the Mississippi, with skills that they want to pass on, and with abilities that they can pass on that will make a whole, not just what I want to do, but what they can do also to increase abilities for all children and other folks, low-income folks who just don't have these opportunities. Let me tell you that people that are working their butts off and aren't children, if given the ability to have these things for themselves, will do them as well.
Okay,
So you're asking me how we get all of these individuals who are nonpartisan, involved in what we're doing.
and independence. And let me be
Independence.
a little more specific to what I think we're dealing with today, which is, groups that are just completely lost, that are so extreme that there's no chance that we are going to be able to likely capture them in some way. And I would say those are the extreme MAGA Trump supporters. For instance, the woman who stated that even if he raped her daughter, that she would still support him. I think that's just a mental illness that is beyond reach at this point. But I believe, and I think the statistics prove that there is a group of independents that don't really align with democratic ideals, but are not extremely comfortable with the extremism of the Republican Party at this time, okay? And and as a result, simply just don't vote because they don't feel there's anything there
Right.
for them.
Okay,
So
I would love to address that.
okay.
There's a behavioral premise that says the more attention you pay to a behavior, the more that behavior increases. And so what I suggest doing when we talk about organizing is to totally ignore the bad behavior and the people who produce the bad behavior. Don't pay any attention to them, because you might stimulate them to vote. The biggest thing that we have to do in this country is to get the vote out, the vote for decency, the vote for human rights, etc. out. How do you do that? Well, first of all, I think it's an upside down pyramid kind of thing, where what we start with here is we start with all of the zones within the community, and we find somebody who is deeply attached to that part of the county and knows people within that part of the county. There are 15 zones in this county. And those 15 people, after they've been trained by us, will then find 2 people in each of their precincts within their zone to train as well. And they can start with 10 precincts at a time. They can start with 20 precincts at a time. But once they have all of their precincts covered by these people, and I'm not saying these people are elected to office or anything, these are just volunteers for their zone, for their precinct committees, that each of these people is then trained to find one person, a committee of one person for every 100 voters that vote the way we hope they'll vote within their group. So that's the structure of how you begin to get everybody involved. How do you find those 100 people? What you do precinct by precinct is print out from the van. The van, for people who don't know, is the list of all of the people within a place that vote and how they vote and how they're registered and how old they are and how young they are, etc. You have them printed out house by house in house order for every precinct. And you have your 100 people in a precinct take their list of all of the streets that are closest to their homes. What they do initially is they cross out everyone on that list that they know that they can't reach. And that, for the purpose of our discussion, those are all the Republicans. Because if they're still registered Republican, there's probably something wrong with them. They probably don't agree with us. Then you have all of the Democrats on the list. So you go to visit them to see where they stand, and you introduce yourself to them, and you become friends with them. You check to see if they have any children in their homes that aren't registered, or anybody else in their house that aren't registered. Then you go to all of the independent homes in that area, and you talk to them and find out where they stand. Now, if they stand with the Republicans, you again cross them out. If they don't, you know that they're convincible. So you reach them that way. But the most important part in what our kids did, this is how our kids registered people to vote, is that when you have the houses all in a row, then you know who isn't registered, which houses that don't have registered people in them. So then you start going to every house that has no one registered in it, and you try to get them registered, but you talk to them and you see where they stand. Now, I can't say this out loud, but some people would say, what if they register Republican? And I would say, of course they can register Republican. You just cross them out and you don't deal with them, but also they have to send in their own registration.
Okay, so this is a system of how you identify independent voters and engage with them. Okay, fine. So who does that? Okay, so again, we talked about this. Here in Palm Beach County, we have a lot of different groups working for the same goals on the same platform. We have, I'm not clear on those, 3 or 4 indivisible groups that are not working on one umbrella. We have the Democratic Party here, but I'm not even sure how vested they are in organization and structure and how they're interacting with these other groups. And one of my concerns remains, and we talked about this earlier, that how do you get all these groups together into one unit so this can be done in an organized, effective way from the top down?
If the community knows that we're doing this, and
Right.
They know that we're looking for people to fill all of these positions, then that's how we get the people. We have people who know people who know people. We have people all over the county. Now, we have people of all different ages. Some of us are never going to go door to door anymore because we're much too old.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're looking for, the younger people, the older folks, for instance, can take the top positions of trainers of these other groups. So we need 15 major trainers within the county who will train precinct leaders. The precinct leaders can then train the people within their precinct to be able to do this.
We're talking that the Democratic Party would be doing this.
No.
No? Okay.
No, we're shadowing the Democratic Party because
Okay.
the Democratic Party could have done this and they didn't. But at some point, if we're training all of these young people in how to organize within their own neighborhoods, part of what I see them doing, for instance, is taking petitions around on issues. So if they have 100 people and there's a petition to end the right to work in, designation in Florida, and to make unions a priority in Florida. If each one of these people gets 100 signatures, you can get 1.5 million signatures in Palm Beach County for these issues. If the issue is environmental rights, and we have a petition to ensconce that into the Constitution of Florida, then they can use the issues on which to approach their neighbors. So there's a whole network of things that can learn to do this. Each of these people will be trained in how to run for office. They'll be trained in the morality of being in office and how you actually do this. They'll be trained in issues that come up when you're in office. Now, the office can be their precinct leadership, which they can run for, but not through our nonprofit. But they can run to be a precinct leader, in the Democratic Party, and they can do this as a precinct leader because there are almost no precinct leaders in the entire county left at all. If they want to run for local offices for the different city positions, we can train them in how to do this if we have a base by which to do this. We can train them in how to address the issues and what each issue means. If we have groups working in a community, and again, there's a pothole that they're not filling, we work on the potholes.
So we're creating a structure, an
We're
organizational
creating a structure.
Okay.
So, now let me say that I have been part of a structure like this before, and in our structure we had no African American elected officials ever, and we created this structure where we all branched out. There were 25 of us. We all branched out through our entire district, and we took parts of that district and we won all 7 seats, from national to local to state. We won every single seat we went up because we did it, because we organized and we met our neighbors.
This is where and when?
In Philadelphia.
Okay, so, but again, I'm going back to my original question. So you're creating this a successful organizational structure, effective organizational structure of volunteers and trained individuals to work at the grassroots level and building up from that point. Okay,
Right.
But you still have to have a platform of what specific issues are predominant, and it's like whack-a-mole, I feel sometimes, with what's going on here.
You can have more than one issue. I mean, in our outline, we listed, I think, 7 or 8 issues that we thought would be issues that we could bring to the community. One of the things that you learn from the community is what issues they want us to address as well, so that as we go out and talk to our neighbors, we bring back what our neighbors want to say. And 100 people are not very many people for a person to deal with.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we can put that together.
Okay.
I'm not worried about that. What I'm most worried about is that it can't be an amorphous thing where you don't know where you're going to meet and you don't know where you're going to gather. We need a place where somebody can be paid to work every single day on this particular issue and make it happen. We need a place that is a diverse place that will allow all sorts of groups in there, but the main focus of this is the organizational structure of taking back this county for human beings and for all of the rights that we all cherish.
Okay, so are these paid positions, any of these positions paid, or are they all volunteer positions?
Eventually, well, the main position will be a paid position.
Okay.
With a very, very skilled person in the leadership position. Other than that, I mean, and because we're a nonprofit, we will go out after all kinds of grants, but we need a place to work out of before we do this. Actually, look over my history, you'll see that I have run nonprofits for decades, and that we've always lost them because we've lost the space to developers. And that's just what happened to my gallery recently. So we have to own a space that no one can ever kick us out of, and that we can pass on to the next generation.
Okay.
Once we have that space, we can take whatever talents we have within this community and train generation after generation to do this. Now, the example of this was the Highlander Center in now I'm going to say Tennessee. Was it Tennessee? Yeah. Okay. With Guy and Candy Carawan, who taught the entire civil rights movement, and they were burned down by the Klan, but they're up and running again. They've been doing this for generations. That's where everybody was trained because they were there to do this, and they're still doing it. If we can find a center like that here, and my fantasy is 10 to 20,000 square feet, then we can put all of these elements into it and give all of these opportunities to people who have these ideas. None of us have to be, you know, one big group. We have all of these groups that will come up together to make the whole.
So
You know, and we can put the octopus head on the top of the building.
So co-op kind
Yeah,
of.
absolutely.
Okay, so being realistic with the cost of real estate in this area and the availability of space, especially space that you could purchase, you know, you're talking about a significant amount, realistically significant amount of money.
If they can donate to a nonprofit for incredible gains, and they can donate it over a 10-year period and get good, you know, if they are wealthy enough, they'll get a lot of good gains out of this.
Mhm.
If we can find somebody really wealthy who's willing to buy us a building, I will not give up till I die.